Elena Vasquez stepped into the secure briefing room, the heavy steel door closing behind her with a muted thud. The air was cooler than the blistering Syrian heat outside, but it carried the scent of sand, dust, and the faint tang of machine oil. A wall-mounted air unit hummed steadily, its vibration just audible over the stillness. Maps were pinned to corkboards, corners curling from heat, and a large tactical table was cluttered with grease pencil markings, aerial photos, and folded topographic sheets. The muted colors of the room were broken only by the dark uniforms and scattered gear of the men already seated. Every head turned toward her. The low murmur of conversation evaporated as 8 pairs of eyes locked on her with the same kind of focus she had seen on predators sizing up something they weren't sure they wanted near them. They wore the expressions of men who had endured too much and who had little patience left for untested newcomers. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Kellerman stood near the head of the table, his ice-blue gaze sweeping over her as if he were running a silent inventory. He barely glanced at the medical credentials folder in her hand before saying, without warmth, that they had requested Rodriguez back. The name landed in the room like an unspoken accusation. She had read Rodriguez's file 3 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, and a reputation for keeping his team alive in situations that would have broken other medics. Impossible boots to fill, and every man here knew it. The silence that followed was almost physical, pressing down on her shoulders, daring her to falter. She recognized the test. East LA had taught her to read a room before she spoke, to find the balance between yielding and standing firm. She met Kellerman's eyes, holding them. Her voice was calm, her words deliberate. She said she was not here to replace Rodriguez, only to do her job and keep them breathing long enough to go home. The statement was stripped of flattery or false bravado, but it carried weight in the way she delivered it. Around the table, the men gave little away. Some shifted slightly. A few exchanged brief glances, but their postures remained guarded. Kellerman's gaze lingered on her for a heartbeat longer, the smallest narrowing of his eyes suggesting he was reassessing something. Then he turned back to the tactical map spread before him. The lines, symbols, and coordinates. There were the world she was stepping into. Though she knew she was not yet part of it, she stayed standing, spine straight, the folder still in her hand like a shield she would not lower until she had to. The weight of the room didn't lessen. It simply shifted, from dismissal to a watchful, silent measurement. Every move she made from this moment on would be judged, not against the standard of her training, but against what they believed was necessary to survive. In this place, respect wasn't inherited. It had to be earned, and earned quickly, with no second chances. The desert sun beat down on the training ground, baking the hard-packed dirt until it radiated heat in waves. The smell of gun oil hung in the air, mingling with dust kicked up by boots and the faint metallic tang from spent shell casings scattered near the range. Elena Vasquez moved through the simulated casualty zone with crisp efficiency, kneeling beside a man playing the role of a wounded operator. Her gloved hands were steady as she checked his airway, applied a tourniquet, and ran through her trauma sequence without hesitation. Every motion was deliberate, economical, nothing wasted. She didn't glance at the men watching her, but she felt their eyes on her as clearly as she felt the grit under her knees. Later that week, the conditioning run stretched over uneven ground, the early heat already pressing down like a weight. Chief Petty Officer Hayes, broad-shouldered and carrying the easy swagger of a man used to setting the pace, took the lead. His stride was long, deliberate, and just fast enough to push her to the edge. Elena matched it without complaint, keeping her breathing controlled, shoulders loose, and eyes forward. By the 5th mile, sweat rolled into her eyes, but her pace didn't falter. When they reached the finish, she simply nodded at Hayes and moved on, leaving him with the smallest flicker of acknowledgement in return. During a morning briefing, Collins tossed a crude remark across the table, the kind that tested boundaries as much as it entertained the others. She didn't pause, didn't raise her voice, just sent back a razor-edged comment so quick and precise that it drew a bark of laughter from Morrison and even pulled the corner of Kellerman's mouth into the faintest smile. She didn't dwell on it. The moment passed, but she noticed Collins studying her with something other than casual amusement. The real turning point came late on a Friday night. The aid station was dimly lit, the hum of the generator low and steady. Instruments lay neatly arranged on a metal tray, their surfaces gleaming in the light of a single desk lamp. Collins appeared in the doorway, his gait uneven. A gash split the skin above his left eye. Swollen knuckles told their own story, and the faint scent of alcohol and cheap perfume clung to him. Regulation demanded she report it. That report would mean disciplinary action and likely pull him from the team. She looked at him for a long moment before setting out her suturing kit. Her hands moved with quiet precision, irrigating the wound, numbing the skin, threading the needle. She asked if the equipment malfunction was worth the trouble, her tone flat but edged with dry humor. He caught her meaning, muttered that it wouldn't happen again. She finished the stitches in neat, even lines that would leave barely a scar, then filled out his injury report to match his cover story. By morning, the story had spread. Not about the fight, but about the medic who could be trusted with more than just their lives. The orders came down without ceremony, a routine reconnaissance sweep of Al-Hasaka, a dusty border town where intelligence suggested a small weapons cache guarded by no more than 2 or 3 men. The briefing was concise, stripped of any unnecessary detail. Just the map, overlays, a few grainy, aerial photos, and Kellerman's voice setting the parameters. It was the kind of mission the team could run in their sleep. But Elena Vasquez had learned that routine was a dangerous word in this environment. The calm in the room before departure felt almost manufactured, the easy rhythm of a team that had done this many times before. Yet she kept her attention on the small things, the patterns in what was said and what was left unsaid. The insertion began under a sky washed pale by the moon, the horizon broken by the faint glow of the town's lights. The desert air was cool, carrying the smell of dust and something faintly metallic. Their boots moved over gravel with a muted crunch, every step measured and deliberate. Ahead, the silhouettes of the SEALs blended into the darkness, their gear absorbing the faint spill of moonlight. Elena kept her place in the formation, breathing evenly under the weight of her pack. Her night vision, goggles, pulling the world into a palette of green and shadow. As they moved closer, she began to notice things that didn't align with the briefing. In the sand near the outskirts, fresh truck tire tracks cut clean lines, deeper than a single light supply vehicle would make. Near a row of low buildings, one door stood out metal reinforced and newer than the weathered wood around it, its hinges gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Above, a brief glint on a rooftop disappeared as quickly as it appeared, like the reflection of a scope lens catching the light before vanishing into shadow. She didn't call it out yet. These were fragments, hints. To the untrained eye, they could be nothing. But she cataloged each one silently, trusting the habit that had kept her alive before. The radio chatter stayed clipped and professional. Morrison's quiet check-ins, Collins's murmured range updates, Kellerman's occasional low command. No one's tone carried alarm, but there was an extra edge in the precision of their movements, as if they, too, were sensing something that didn't match the plan. They skirted the edge of the town, the smell of smoke from distant cooking fires drifting on the wind. Elena's gloved hand brushed the smooth casing of her medical kit as she shifted her grip on her rifle, a reminder of why she was here and what her role was meant to be. Still, her gaze kept drifting to the darker alleys, to the shapes that seemed to move just beyond the edge of her vision. The oppressive stillness pressed in, broken only by the faint crackle of the radio and the measured sound of boots on dirt. In the shadows, The truth of the mission was waiting, unseen, but already changing the shape of the night ahead. The first sign that the mission had shifted from reconnaissance to survival was the movement Elena Vasquez saw through her scope. Not 2 or 3 guards, but dozens of disciplined fighters unloading crates from trucks and positioning weapons with practiced speed. The count ran well past 30, and their bearing made it clear these were not irregular militia. Kellerman's order to abort came low and even, but they were already being watched. The blast that tore through the observation building came without warning, a deep, concussive roar that folded part of the 3rd floor into the 2nd. The shockwave punched the air from Elena's lungs, filling her ears with a high-pitched ring as dust and grit rained down. Through the haze, she heard Rodriguez, the comms specialist, not the medic they had lost, gasping. He was propped against a wall, a crimson bloom spreading fast across his thigh. Training took over. She dropped to her knees, hands pressing hard over the wound, feeling the arterial spray pulse against her palms. She dug for a tourniquet, cinched it high, and cranked until the bleeding slowed, her fingers numb from the pressure. The air was thick with cordite and pulverized concrete. Muzzle flashes strobing in the gaps of collapsed walls. Somewhere outside, AK fire cracked in sharp rhythm, countered by the heavier thump of machine guns. A shout from Hayes cut through the din, raw with pain. She scrambled across the debris to find him pinned against a shattered wall, his right shoulder mangled, the arm limp and unresponsive. Blood soaked into his vest in a dark patch. Shrapnel had torn deep, severing muscle and likely damaging nerves. She worked fast, cutting away fabric, packing the wound, securing a pressure bandage even as incoming rounds chipped at the concrete around them. Her own cover was crumbling, chunks breaking away under sustained fire. Then she saw it, the glint of glass far across the courtyard. Steady and deliberate. A sniper. Her stomach dropped as she traced the angles in her mind. They were being funneled. Each attempt to shift position answered instantly with fire. A spotter stood beside him, feeding corrections, coordinating with gunners on the surrounding rooftops. The fields of fire overlapped perfectly. A cage without bars. The radio carried Morrison's terse report, "Sniper in the minaret, 400 meters locking us down." Every move now carried risk. Rodriguez couldn't walk. Hayes couldn't fire. The remaining shooters were pinned, ammunition running low. Elena pressed her back against the cold, pitted surface of the wall, breathing through the burn in her throat from dust and smoke. She could feel the vibration of impacts through the concrete, each one biting closer. The blood-soaked tourniquet on Rodriguez's leg was stark against the gray rubble, a reminder of how thin the margin was between holding on and losing everything. The walls, physical and tactical, were closing in, and survival would mean tearing a gap through them before the cage slammed shut. Hayes was cradling his ruined shoulder, teeth clenched against the pain. When Kellerman crawled across the rubble to Elena Vasquez, his voice was low but carried the weight of command sharpened by urgency. Hayes was out of the fight. The sniper and his spotter in the mosque balcony were boxing them in, and unless that lock was broken, they would all be dead before extraction could reach them. He nodded toward the massive Barrett .50 caliber rifle lying beside Hayes, its matte finish dulled by dust, but still radiating menace. Elena stared at it, the heft of what he was asking settling on her like a physical weight. She was a medic. Her job was to keep people breathing, not end lives from 400 meters. Hayes tried to push himself upright, his pride flashing hot through the pain. He could still fire, he insisted, one good arm or not. Kellerman shut it down with a hard edge in his tone, pointing out that Elena's hands were the steadiest on the team and that she had the eyes for detail. This shot demanded. Hayes looked at her then, something unspoken passing between them, the reluctant acknowledgement that this was the only way. Kellerman described the target, the spotter standing in the open, binoculars pressed to his face, feeding every move they made to the sniper concealed behind the stone balustrade. Take out the spotter first, then the sniper. Without those eyes, their cage would have a hole. She slid into position beside the Barrett, the cold steel heavy against her shoulder. Adjusting the scope under fire was like threading a needle in a storm, every movement precise, but made with the awareness that a single mistake would cost seconds she didn't have. Her mind reached back to the mountains of New Mexico, to her grandfather's calm voice on frosty mornings, reminding her that shooting was surgery at a distance. Same breathing, same stillness, same focus on what mattered most. The reticle settled on the spotter's chest. She exhaled, squeezed, and the Barrett roared like thunder trapped in the room. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, and through the scope she saw the round miss, splintering stone just inches wide. In that instant, Sniper turned his glass toward her, and the black circle of his scope locked onto her position. 3 seconds, maybe less. She racked the bolt, feeling the mechanics click into place. The second shot came in the still point between breaths, the world narrowing to a single green-tinted silhouette. The spotter snapped backward and vanished from view, the binoculars tumbling after him. The sniper's head jerked toward where his partner had been, and she was already chambering the third round. The crosshairs found the sliver of his position, and the shot punched through stone and flesh alike, his rifle clattering against the balcony rail before disappearing. The silence from that direction was instant and absolute. Her pulse was still hammering in her ears when Kellerman's voice cut in, telling her to keep firing. She swung the scope to the second-floor window across the courtyard, where a PKM team was tearing into their escape route. The heavy barrel of the Barrett spat fire again, and the gunner crumpled behind a collapsing wall of sandbags. A mortar team appeared on the roof of an adjacent building, and she didn't think the fifth shot hit home, scattering the crew before they could drop around into the tube. The air inside the shattered building was thick with smoke and dust kicked up by the concussion of her shots. Debris swirled in eddies from the open gaps where walls had been, each discharge of the Barrett sending another wave of grit into the air. Hayes was watching her now, with a mix of pain and something closer to respect. Kellerman gave her the barest nod before returning to coordinate the extraction over the radio, his tone sharper now that the worst choke points had been broken. Her shoulder throbbed where the rifle had driven into it, but her breathing was steady. Around her, the team shifted back into motion, using the gap she had torn in the enemy's overwatch to push toward their exit. She let the barrel cool, the weight of the rifle still heavy in her grip. Aware that something in the room had changed. She had crossed a line, stepped outside the boundaries of her orders, and in doing so had redefined herself in their eyes, not just a medic, but someone they could trust to end the fight when it mattered most. The first thump of rotor blades rolled across the rooftops, low and heavy, a sound that seemed to pull the air itself into motion. Dust swirled in gritty waves through the shattered windows, stinging Elena Vasquez's eyes as she crouched over Rodriguez. The blood-soaked tourniquet on his thigh held, but she checked it again, fingers firm, eyes scanning the IV line to ensure it was still delivering. Hayes sat propped against a wall, his right arm bound and immobilized, watching her work with a crooked grin. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." "Doc," he said over the roar, his voice rough but tinged with genuine warmth. She didn't look up, just secured the last dressing on Rodriguez's leg and told Hayes his vitals were stable enough for transport. The helicopter swept in low, rotor wash hammering the building. Shouted commands bounced off the walls as Kellerman moved the team toward the extraction point. Elena shouldered her med pack, its straps digging into muscles sore from firing the Barrett, and followed the staggered line toward the open roof. The wind up there was a living thing, tugging at her gear, whipping grit into every exposed seam. She kept her head down, eyes on the wounded, guiding Rodriguez to the skid where 2 crewmen lifted him aboard. The flight medic leaned out into the gale, voice pitched high to cut through the noise. "Outstanding work." He called to her, one hand steadying Hayes as he was passed into the cabin. She didn't reply, just moved with the same precision she had in the firefight, checking each bandage, tugging at straps, making sure no line was kinked before stepping back. Kellerman was watching her from a few feet away, his expression no longer the cool skepticism of their first meeting. There was calculation, there still. But something else had replaced the doubt, a quiet recognition, sharpened by the knowledge of what she had done without hesitation. The last of the team clambered aboard, and she followed, ducking under the spinning blades into the hot, fuel-scented interior. The transition from battlefield to bird was abrupt, the roar of the fight replaced by the steady thrum of the engines and the close, metallic scent of aviation fuel mixing with the copper tang of blood. Dust still clung to her gloves, streaked dark where it had mixed with sweat and blood. The leather stretched tight across knuckles that ached from recoil. She peeled them off and dropped them into her pack, feeling their weight linger in her hands. As the helicopter lifted, the town fell away beneath them, the minaret shrinking to a pale shape in the distance. Around her, the team settled into the rhythm of extraction, heads tilted back, eyes half shut, conserving what little energy they had left. No one said much, but the glances told the story, a nod from Morrison, the faintest smile from Collins, Hayes's eyes meeting hers for a moment longer than necessary. In this world, that was all the ceremony she was going to get, and all she needed. The open door beside her framed the fading lights of Alhasaka, the dark horizon beyond it, and whatever waited next. The weight of her pack pressed into her spine, and the weight of the day settled deeper still, carried with the same steady grip she had held on the rifle. The debriefing room felt more like a holding cell than a place for discussion. The fluorescent lights were too bright, buzzing faintly, throwing a cold sheen across the long table where folders sat in neat stacks. A pot of coffee steamed faintly in the corner, its bitter scent mixing with the dry tang of paper. Elena Vasquez sat midway down the table, shoulders square, hands resting loosely in her lap, every inch of her posture calculated to be attentive without looking defensive. Across from her, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Kellerman read from his after-action report, his voice steady and deliberate. Corpsman Vasquez eliminated 3 high-value threats at extended range under active combat conditions, directly enabling the team's survival and extraction. He said it without embellishment, but the weight in the room shifted. Several of the SEALs glanced her way. Collins's eyes flickered with something like pride. Morrison gave a subtle nod. Even Hayes, his arm in a fresh sling, let the corner of his mouth lift before looking back at the table. The acknowledgement was quiet, but it was there, woven into the silence between Kellerman's words. When the base commander, Colonel Martinez, spoke, his tone was measured but edged with something more. A Navy corpsman taking out 3 targets, including a sniper team, with a Barrett 50 caliber is not standard procedure. He tapped the report once, the paper making a flat sound in the still air. It speaks to an unusual combination of capability and composure. His gaze met hers for a moment before he slid a thin folder across the table. The cover was stamped with bold black letters, Special Operations Combat Medic Program. Elena's fingertips brushed the folder but didn't open it. The material inside was already familiar from reputation alone, 2 years of advanced trauma medicine combined with some of the most punishing tactical training in the military, a path that blurred the line between healer and operator until they became the same person. There's also this, Martinez continued, sliding another document forward. This one was slimmer, the paper heavier. Her name was printed across the top beside the words, Silver Star Recommendation. She kept her expression neutral, but her pulse picked up, the meaning settling slowly in her chest. The medal was an honor, but it came with a shadow, the memory of the shots fired, the men who hadn't gotten back up. Kellerman's eyes stayed on her, unreadable, as if weighing whether she would step through the door that had just been opened. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the fluorescent light sharper, the air drier. Elena kept her hands still, her breathing steady, aware of every detail. The SOCM folder in front of her felt heavier than paper should. Recognition was its own kind of battlefield. She had earned a place she hadn't sought, standing at a threshold between the life she had known and one that would demand more of her than she could yet measure. The choice wasn't whether she could do it. It was whether she was willing to become the kind of medic who carried both the scalpel and the rifle without hesitation. The barracks were quiet when Kellerman stopped by, the kind of stillness that came only at the end of a long deployment. The faint hum of the AC unit filled the space as he set 2 paper coffee cups on her desk and took the plastic chair across from her. He didn't talk about the shot or the kill count. Instead, he spoke of the moment under fire when she had been treating Hayes and Rodriguez, how she had kept her head, seen the whole fight, and made decisions that kept the team alive. "That's why I trusted you with the rifle," he said simply. 6 months later, Elena stood in the humid Georgia heat at the start of SOCM selection. The days blurred into an unbroken chain of medical drills, weapons courses, and small unit tactics, each carried out under the weight of exhaustion. She learned to move faster, think clearer, and work in the space where medicine and combat met without pause. 18 months after that, she graduated. There was no speech, no ceremony beyond the quiet moment when the SOCM patch was placed in her hand. She felt its weight, and the truth it carried, the transformation was already complete. Her orders sent her to SEAL Team 6. As she prepared to leave, Kellerman's words from that night in Syria came back, as sharp as if he stood beside her now. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. She carried that with her, along with the lessons from the rubble and the rifle. There was no need for anyone to see the change. The readiness was in her hands, her eyes, and the quiet way she stepped forward into whatever came next.